What's up, C-Quill Nation? I'm Patrick McPherson, and welcome back to our vlog. Last week, you heard Abby and Jessica discuss the integral parts of the internet. What is it? How can we use it? And how it affects the movie industry. If you haven't had a chance to watch that yet, I'll link the description in the box below. This week, we're going to dive in to PR, otherwise known as public relations. What is it? Again, with the history of it and how it affects the digital media age. Now, let's dive in. All right, so pretty baseline here. What is public relations? Well, according to the PRSA, the Public Relations Society of America, PR, or public relations, is the process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. So it's a very baseline definition, and we'll delve into that a little bit more later. But people who work in HR essentially strive to maintain good and positive public images for the companies they represent. So right now we're going to start and we're going to go directly into the history of PR, what that is, and I think you'll find it a little bit interesting. So in doing research, we found out that there is actually a museum, that's right, museum, in downtown Manhattan in New York City. So that's actually pretty fascinating. Who knew there would be a museum of public relations? Anyways, let's get into some of this history. So, dating all the way back to 17,000 BC, that's right, I said BC, there are traces of PR taking place in the forms of cave drawings. Now, to me, this is fascinating. This is before the idea of PR actually even existed, but humans have been communicating with different organizations since pretty much creation. Even if you take it all the way back to the Garden of Eden, there was some form of communication taking place between Adam and Eve and God, and even the serpent. Fast forwarding a little bit to the 1st century AD, when we're talking about the Apostle Paul, and he's responsible for writing 13 books of the Bible. And what he wrote them in forms of letters. They're actually meant to be read publicly to the intended audience. That there is Paul communicating to the audiences. He's relating information publicly. That's very baseline, just in the 1st century. Next, we're moving to the 8th and 9th century. So in the 8th and 9th century, the Han dynasty in Asia was actually rising to power. And they created a series of what probably could be considered the first bit of public news ever. So they're referred to as Topano, and I know that I'm not pronouncing that right, but they were essentially handwritten news sheets that were talking bad about the leadership of the Han dynasty. They were planning a coup, but nevertheless, they're trying to get as much communication as they can out to people from one organization to the next, or from one organization to the supporters of the organization. Next, we are moving on to the ages of faith, and there are several different things we could dive into here. We see famous and infamous people using this form of communication to get information out to the public. It starts to shape of what we see PR as today. Very baseline shaping, but nevertheless, it's there. Staying connected to the public and getting them information is what you want. And this is starting to become a theme amongst the 8th and 9th century, the 10th and 15th century, even moving all the way up to the age of... Next, we're going to turn and look at the ages of print and mass media. Now, when you're thinking about the ages of print, where else to start but the printing press? First created by Johannes Gutenberg, this of course revolutionized the printing industry. It made it much easier to mass produce information and get this information in the hands of the public. You guys are definitely going to know these next couple phases in history that we talk about, starting with the Protestant Reformation. Using the press that Gutenberg created, Martin Luther was able to create the document known as the 95 Theses, which was the spark of the Protestant Reformation. The Reformation was a huge moment in the world of PR, and for the first time, people are reading this information for themselves, and the information traveled all across the Western world, and everyone knew what was going on. In the age of print media, PR took off for the first time. Things didn't have to be written 100 times over by hand, and they didn't have to be individually mailed to thousands of different people just to get information out. Next, we move on to the 19th century. In the 19th century, it's the official age of mass media. We learned from Henry Vanderbilt that words cannot be unsaid. Words are powerful, and they have lasting effects on people. Mass media really started to take off in the 18 and 1900s with the invention of the telegraph. You guys will definitely know this next event for sure. In 2017, The Greatest Showman, a movie, was produced and put out in cinema for the public's enjoyment, but it was partially a true story. The Greatest Showman indeed was known as P.T. Barnum, and he had an act for the public. He had an act for drawing in wild conclusions about people just to entertain the public and grab their attention. While P.T. Barnum is probably now known as an infamous character, he still was one of the fathers of public relations. He really knew how to take a subject and grasp the public's attention for the betterment of his organization. All right, and lastly, as we wrap up the history of public relations, I want to draw your attention to the digital media age. In 1969, the age of digital media was born with the creation of the internet. This is when things really started to explode. And then lastly, it really started in 2008 and it's continued to the present, was the social media presence in really our daily lives, and how PR connects to that. This was really done well by President Barack Obama, using social media as a political platform to get info out to voters, supporters, and the American people. The only person who's done this probably more is the previous president, is President Donald Trump. And he used this in the same ways to reach the American people. He felt like it was his duty to tweet or use Facebook, other social media platforms, to help get his thoughts out and reach the American people. It is the fastest growing market on the internet. And I think that pretty much wraps it up for the history of PR. Join us a little later in the week where we're going to sit down and discuss how public relations impacts the movie industry. Thanks for listening to the C-Quill vlog, and we'll see you in the next one.